If you like this story, please hit the subscribe button so you don't miss the next exciting stories. And now let's enjoy the story.
The night was thick with silence, save for the rhythmic hum of the car's engine. Ethan Carter tightened his grip on the steering wheel as he navigated the deserted stretch of road leading out of downtown. Sophia Miller, his fiancée, sat beside him, scrolling through her phone, her face illuminated by the dim blue light of the screen. The city behind them was a glittering sea of high-rises. But out here, on the fringes of civilization, the streets were dark, empty, and forgotten. The air inside the car was cool from the AC, but Ethan felt a strange unease settle in his chest. Maybe it was exhaustion, maybe it was the late hour, or maybe it was something else. They had just passed the last working street lamp when it happened. A blur of movement, a flash of fur, a sudden impact. Thump! Sophia gasped. Ethan slammed the brakes. The car skidded to a stop. Heart pounding, Ethan barely had time to process what had happened when something large and frantic crashed through the open back window. A dog, a massive, starving German shepherd, landed in the back seat, its body curling into itself, trembling so violently that the entire car seemed to shake with it. Sophia screamed. Ethan twisted in his seat, his pulse hammering. What the hell? The dog's ribs pressed tightly against its skin, each bone visible under a patchwork of matted fur and dried blood. Its wide, terror-filled eyes darted between them, filled with an urgency that sent a chill straight to Ethan's core. The air in the car shifted from shock to something far darker. The dog wasn't just lost. The dog wasn't just scared. It was running from something. For a second, nobody moved. Sophia's hands were clenched into fists against her chest, her breath coming in short, panicked bursts. Ethan, where did he come from? Ethan swallowed, scanning the road behind them. The street was empty. Too empty. No traffic, no pedestrians, no sign of anyone chasing after the dog. But something about this felt wrong. The shepherd pressed itself into the farthest corner of the back seat, its whole body trembling uncontrollably. Its tail was curled so tightly between its legs that it was almost invisible. Its ears were pinned back and its chest rose and fell in rapid, shallow breaths. Ethan reached for the door handle. Okay, buddy, let's get you out. The moment his hand moved, the dog let out a low, trembling growl. Not aggressive, not a threat, but something much worse. Pure, unfiltered fear. Ethan froze. Sophia whispered, Ethan, he's petrified. Ethan's pulse pounded in his ears. What the hell is a dog like this doing out here? Sophia slowly turned to look out the back window, scanning the dimly lit road. Her expression shifted, from confusion to dread. Ethan? She breathed. I think we're being watched. Ethan's stomach turned to ice. At the very end of the street, half hidden in the shadows, was a black SUV with tinted windows, parked in an alleyway. The headlights were off, no movement inside. But somehow it felt like they weren't alone. And then, a man stepped out. Dressed in dark clothing, he stood by the SUV, his face just out of view. His posture was too still, too calculating. His head tilted slightly in their direction, and then, a flash. A phone screen lit up in the darkness, pointed directly at them. Taking a photo. Ethan's entire body tensed. Sophia whispered, What the hell is going on? As if hearing her voice, the dog in the back seat shrunk in on itself, pressing even deeper into the corner, shaking so hard that his bones rattled. He knew that man. He was terrified of that man. Ethan's instincts kicked in. We're leaving. He threw the car into drive and hit the gas. The tires screeched against the pavement as they tore down the street, the black SUV shrinking in the rearview mirror. The man didn't move, didn't chase them. But somehow Ethan knew. This wasn't over. Sophia twisted in her seat, her voice shaking. Ethan, what did we just get ourselves into? Ethan glanced at the rearview mirror again. The dog in the back seat, still cowering. The black SUV, still parked in the shadows. And a feeling deep in his gut that whispered, we shouldn't have found him. Or worse, maybe he wasn't running away. Maybe he was trying to escape a fate worse than death. Ethan pressed harder on the gas. No turning back now. The stray that chose us. A story of survival, injustice, and redemption. The night stretched on as Ethan Carter pressed down on the gas pedal, his heartbeat thrumming like a war drum in his ears. The city lights behind them faded into the distance, swallowed by the dark, empty roads leading toward their neighborhood. Sophia Miller, beside him, sat stiffly in her seat, constantly checking the rearview mirror. The black SUV was gone. For now. In the back seat, the terrified German shepherd remained curled into the farthest corner, his body trembling so violently that the entire car seemed to vibrate with his fear. His wide, unblinking eyes darted between them, as if expecting them to strike him, to throw him back out into the night. Sophia swallowed hard. "Ethan, he's completely broken." Ethan didn't respond. His hands gripped the wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. The weight of the situation sat like an anchor on his chest. Who the hell was that man back there? Why was the dog so petrified? And why did it feel like they had just made a very dangerous enemy? The injustice of it burned in Ethan's gut. Someone had done this to the dog. Someone had hurt him, and no one had stopped them. Not the police, not the system, no one. And now that someone wanted him back. They pulled into the driveway. Their small house sat in the quiet suburbs, modest but safe. At least it had been. Tonight, it didn't feel safe at all. Ethan shut off the engine and turned in his seat. The dog still hadn't moved. He was frozen in place as if his very existence hinged on staying invisible. Ethan let out a slow breath. "We need to get him inside." Sophia hesitated. "What if he bites?" "He's too scared to bite," Ethan muttered. Sophia turned back to the shepherd. His eyes flicked between them, desperate, untrusting. "We need a name for him," she whispered. Ethan studied the dog's haunted brown eyes, filled with pain, with trauma, with something too broken to put into words. "Max." Sophia glanced at him. "Why Max?" Ethan's throat tightened. "Because he looks like he's already lost everything." Sophia nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. Carefully, she opened her door and stepped out. The cold night air rushed in, but inside the car, Max didn't move an inch. Ethan slowly opened the back door. "Come on, buddy. You're safe now." Max flinched so violently that it was like Ethan had struck him. He let out a low, guttural whimper, curling himself into an even smaller ball. Ethan's stomach twisted. What the hell had this dog been through? He crouched down, making himself as small and unthreatening as possible. "Max, we're not going to hurt you." Still, Max didn't move. Ethan sighed and reached for the bag of leftover grilled chicken in the front seat. Slowly, he pulled out a small piece and placed it just inches away from Max's nose. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, a twitch, a slow, cautious sniff, a desperate hunger battling against paralyzing fear. And finally, Max moved. Just a little, just enough to lean forward and take the food. It was the smallest step, but for a dog like Max, it was everything. Inside the house, Max did not explore. He did not sniff around. He collapsed onto the floor near the couch, his body curled in on itself, still shaking. Sophia crouched down, keeping her voice soft. "We need to check his injuries." Ethan nodded, carefully grabbing a towel and a bowl of warm water. As Sophia reached out ever so slowly, Max flinched again, his breath quickening into panicked whimpers. Sophia's eyes burned with unshed tears. "Ethan, he thinks we're gonna hit him." Ethan clenched his jaw. His hands trembled as he reached for Max's matted fur, brushing it aside to get a better look. And then, his stomach dropped. Sophia sucked in a sharp breath, because under the dirt and tangled fur were scars. Not just scratches, not just bruises, deep, intentional wounds, burn marks, old stab wounds, torn flesh that had healed badly. Sophia covered her mouth, shaking. "Oh my God." Ethan sat back, hands trembling. Max had been tortured. Silence stretched between them. A thick, suffocating silence filled with rage. Ethan's hands curled into fists. "Who the hell does this to an animal?" he growled. Sophia blinked back tears. "Someone who enjoys it." Ethan had seen cruelty before, on the news, in documentaries, in headlines about dogfighting rings and animal abuse cases that never saw justice. But now it was sitting right here, curled up on their living room floor. Now it had a face, a name, a heartbeat. Now it had Max. Sophia exhaled shakily. "We need to report this." Ethan hesitated. "And tell them what? We found a tortured dog and a man was watching us?" Sophia stared at him. "Yes," Ethan rubbed his face. "Sophia, they won't care." She froze. "What?" Ethan's jaw tightened. He had seen it too many times before. Cases of animal cruelty dismissed as not a priority. Reports that went ignored. Shelters too overwhelmed to help. Sophia's voice shook. "You mean the system is just going to let whoever did this get away?" Ethan's chest burned. "I mean, the system was never built to protect victims like Max." Sophia's eyes flashed with something dark. "That's not right." "I know. It's not just not right. It's injustice." Ethan met her gaze, and in that moment, they both knew. They couldn't count on the system. They would have to fight for Max themselves. That night, Max did not sleep. Neither did Ethan. He sat on the couch, watching the dog curled up in the corner, still shaking, still trapped in whatever nightmare he had barely escaped. Ethan's stomach twisted as an unbearable truth settled in. Whoever had done this to Max wasn't done yet. Whoever had been watching them wasn't going to forget. And now, Max was theirs. Which meant, so was the fight. Ethan didn't know what lay ahead. He didn't know what kind of war they had just stepped into. But he knew one thing for damn sure. They weren't giving Max back, no matter what. The clock on the wall read 3:42 a.m. Ethan hadn't moved from the couch in hours. His eyes burned with exhaustion, but sleep was impossible. Max, curled up near the fireplace, hadn't moved either, except for the occasional involuntary shudder that racked his frail body. Sophia had eventually dozed off beside Ethan, but it was a restless sleep. The weight of what they had just done hung in the air like a storm cloud. They had taken in a dog who clearly belonged to someone. Someone cruel. Someone who now wanted him back. And that someone had been watching. Ethan's grip tightened around the baseball bat he had pulled from the closet. He didn't know who these people were or how far they were willing to go, but he knew this. If they came for Max tonight, they'd have to go through him first. The moment Ethan's eyes finally began to droop shut, the sound ripped him awake. Tap, tap, tap. His breath caught in his throat. It wasn't loud, just a soft, deliberate tapping against the front door. Ethan's pulse slammed against his ribs. He reached out, instinctively covering Sophia's hand. She stirred. What was that? Ethan put a finger to his lips. Stay quiet. He strained his ears, listening. Nothing. Then, tap, tap, tap. The hair on the back of his neck stood on end. Sophia sat up, wide-eyed with fear. Ethan carefully placed the bat on the floor and reached for the security camera app on his phone. The front porch feed came into view, and his blood ran cold. There was no one there. Ethan clenched his jaw and got to his feet, moving toward the door as quietly as possible. Sophia grabbed his wrist. Ethan, don't. But he had to. He needed to know. With one deep breath, he unlatched the deadbolt and pulled the door open just an inch. The street outside was silent. Their driveway was empty. But there, on the welcome mat, was a small, folded note. Ethan hesitated, his heart hammering against his ribs. Then slowly he bent down and picked it up. Sophia stood behind him, whispering, "What does it say?" Ethan unfolded it, and the second his eyes landed on the words, his stomach dropped like a stone. "Return what is ours." Below it, scrawled in thick, jagged letters, "No police, no questions, one chance." Sophia's breath hitched, and then Ethan noticed something else. Taped to the bottom of the note was a photo. A grainy, zoomed-in image of their car from earlier that night. Ethan's heart pounded in his ears. This wasn't a warning. This was a promise. Ethan slammed the door shut and locked it. Sophia was shaking. "Ethan?" They were outside, watching us, just standing there. Ethan stared at the note, his blood boiling. "These bastards think they can just scare us into handing Max over." Sophia's voice cracked. "They know where we live." Ethan gritted his teeth. "Yeah. And we sure as hell know they're not giving up." A low whimper pulled their attention to the corner of the room. Max. His eyes flickered open. He wasn't looking at them. He was looking at the note in Ethan's hands. The moment he saw it, his entire body stiffened, his ears flattening. His chest rose and fell in rapid, uneven breaths. And then, he started shaking again. Sophia's voice trembled. "Ethan?" He recognizes it. Ethan stared at Max, then back at the note. And suddenly, it all clicked. This wasn't the first time Max had seen a message like this. Whoever wrote it had owned him before. Sophia grabbed her phone. "We have to call the police." Ethan exhaled sharply. "And say what? That we found a dog and someone left us a creepy note?" Sophia's fingers trembled over the screen. "Yes." Ethan ran a hand through his hair, his jaw tightening. "You really think they're gonna care? Soph?" She blinked. "What do you mean?" Ethan looked at her, his frustration boiling over. "The system doesn't care about dogs like Max. The cops will look at us, tell us to return him to the rightful owner, and then wipe their hands clean." Sophia's hands curled into fists. "But Max's rightful owner is a monster." Ethan clenched his jaw. "I know that. You know that. But you think they do?" Sophia's voice broke. "Then what do we do, Ethan? Just give him back?" Ethan's eyes flicked to Max. The broken, trembling dog who had been burned, beaten, and discarded like trash. A dog who had no one. A dog who had been abandoned by every system designed to protect him. Ethan swallowed the rage burning in his chest. No. He looked at Sophia, his voice deadly serious. We don't give him back. Sophia exhaled, relief flooding her eyes. Ethan gritted his teeth. But we need to be smart, because now? He held up the note, his jaw tightening. Now we're in a fight. Ethan stayed up the rest of the night. His mind raced, piecing together what little information they had. Max had been owned by someone dangerous, someone involved in something much bigger than just abuse. And now they wanted him back. By morning, Sophia was already digging through online forums, searching for any clue about where Max had come from. And then, she found it. A grainy video posted months ago on an anonymous website. Her stomach churned violently as she hit play. The footage was shaky, the camera hidden behind rusted metal bars. In the center of a dark, blood-stained warehouse floor, a dog, chained, battered, forced to fight. A familiar dog. Max. Sophia's hands flew to her mouth, her entire body going cold. Oh my God, she whispered. Max hadn't been just a pet. Max hadn't just been abused, he had been a fighter. A victim of underground dogfighting. And now the people who had used him, tortured him, profited off his pain. They were coming to reclaim their investment. Sophia's breath hitched. Ethan, we just declared war on a dogfighting ring. Ethan's jaw clenched. No, his voice was deadly calm. They declared war the second they put their hands on Max. Sophia's pulse pounded. Then what do we do? Ethan's eyes darkened. We fight back. The sun had barely crested over the horizon when Ethan Carter and Sophia Miller sat at their kitchen table, staring at the grainy video footage still playing on her laptop. Max. Their Max. Not curled up in their living room, trembling in fear. Not the broken dog who had flinched at every touch. No. This was a different Max. A Max they didn't recognize. The video, recorded in secret from inside a blood-stained warehouse, showed a pit lined with rusted cages, the air thick with the sound of shouting men, barking dogs, and the sickening clash of teeth on flesh. And in the center of that chaos, Max stood, bloodied, chained, and fighting for his life. Sophia clapped a hand over her mouth, horror writhing in her gut. Ethan's fists tightened as the reality sank in. Max hadn't just escaped from an abusive home. Max had escaped a death sentence. Sophia barely had time to process what she had just seen when she heard it. A loud crash outside. Max shot up from the blanket, his body going stiff as a board, his ears flattened, his chest rising and falling in frantic, uneven breaths. Ethan was already on his feet, his muscles coiling like a spring. Sophia grabbed his arm. Ethan, he motioned for her to stay back, then crept toward the front door. Another crash. Then the shattering of glass. Ethan's breath hitched. Someone was inside. He lunged for the baseball bat near the couch. His pulse thundered in his ears as he reached for the door handle. With a deep breath, he threw it open. Empty. The living room was silent, except for the cool morning air drifting in through a broken window. Ethan's jaw clenched as he moved toward it. Glass littered the floor. His gaze followed the shards toward the source of impact. A brick, with a note taped to it. Ethan ripped it off, unfolding the crumpled paper with shaking hands. Sophia's voice wavered behind him. What does it say? Ethan's stomach turned to ice. You were warned. Underneath it, scrawled in thick black ink, last chance. Sophia's breath hitched. They're escalating, Ethan muttered, voice tight with fury. Sophia swallowed hard. They broke into our yard. They're pushing us. Ethan's jaw tightened. They want us scared, desperate. Sophia's hands curled into fists. So what do we do? Ethan's grip on the bat tightened. We stop running. An hour later, 2 officers stood in their living room. One, Officer Kane, a middle-aged cop with tired eyes, stood with his arms crossed. The other, a younger officer with a clipboard, jotted notes lazily, barely paying attention. Ethan's patience thinned by the second. A brick through our window, Ethan repeated, jaw tense. A break-in, a threat, and you're telling us there's nothing you can do? Officer Kane exhaled, looking unimpressed. No witnesses, no cameras catching them in the act. He gave a shrug. It's not enough. Sophia clenched her teeth. Not enough for what? To investigate? To care? The younger cop barely glanced up. No fingerprints on the brick. Could be kids messing around. Ethan's chest burned. So we just wait until they do something worse? Officer Kane sighed. Look, I get that you're upset, but you don't get anything. Ethan's voice cut like steel. You didn't see the video. You didn't see what they did to Max. Sophia's voice wavered with anger. This isn't a prank. This isn't some bored teenager smashing a window. These people are dangerous. The younger cop didn't even look up, and that's when Ethan knew. They weren't going to help. They weren't going to do a damn thing. Ethan exhaled through his nose. Fine. If the system wouldn't stop these people, he would. Once the cops were gone, Sophia sat on the couch, her hands trembling against her knees. They don't care, Ethan, she whispered. Ethan crouched in front of her, placing a steadying hand over hers. That just means we handle this ourselves. Sophia exhaled shakily. How? Ethan's mind raced. They needed to know more. More about the dogfighting ring. More about who was running it. More about who was coming after them. And then, Max moved. For the first time all morning, the shepherd's ears twitched. His nose flared slightly. He pushed himself to his feet. Sophia frowned. Max? The dog took a slow step forward. Then another. His head lowered. His nose hovered above the brick, sniffing. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. Sophia's eyes widened. He recognizes the scent. Max's tail stiffened, his body locking up, and then a low growl rumbled from his throat. It wasn't loud. It wasn't aggressive. It was personal. Ethan and Sophia exchanged a glance. Max knew. He knew who had been here. He knew who had thrown that brick. And that meant they had a lead. Ethan grabbed his jacket. Let's go. Sophia stood. Go where? Ethan's jaw tightened. We track them down. Sophia hesitated. Ethan, these people aren't just dog abusers. They're criminals. Ethan met her gaze. They threw a brick through our window, Soph. Next time it won't be a brick. Sophia swallowed. So what? We just walk into whatever hellhole these people came from. Ethan's expression darkened. No, he said. We send them a message. Sophia's pulse quickened. What kind of message? Ethan looked at Max. The dog's shoulders were tense, his ears pinned back, but for the first time, he wasn't just afraid. He was angry. Ethan turned back to Sophia, his eyes deadly calm. We let them know that Max isn't theirs anymore. A beat of silence. Then Sophia nodded. She reached for her coat, her voice steady. Let's make them regret coming after us. Max's ears flicked at the sound of her voice, and for the first time, the broken dog didn't flinch. The air inside the car was thick with tension as Ethan Carter drove through the back streets of the city, following the lead of a dog who had seen hell and lived to escape it. Max sat in the back seat, his body stiff, his ears twitching as if waiting for something, some sound, some scent, to confirm what he already knew. Sophia Miller sat beside Ethan, her hands clenched into fists, her mind racing. They had no plan, no backup. Just a broken dog, a death threat, and a desperate need for justice. It was Max who found it first. They had driven past abandoned warehouses, graffiti-covered walls, and crumbling infrastructure for nearly an hour when Max's ears suddenly perked up. A low growl rumbled from his throat. Ethan's grip tightened on the wheel. You sure about this, buddy? Max didn't move, except for the slightest, almost imperceptible nod. Sophia inhaled sharply. He knows this place. Ethan pulled the car over and killed the engine. They sat in silence, staring at the dilapidated structure before them. A warehouse, partially hidden behind a chain-link fence, its metal doors rusted and dented. No signs, no security cameras. But the moment they stepped out of the car, Ethan could feel it. Something was wrong here. Max stayed glued to his side, his muscles coiled like a spring, his tail low but not tucked. Not fear. Readiness. Sophia's breath was uneven. Ethan, if Max remembers this place, then whoever hurt him. They could still be here, Ethan finished, his jaw tightening. Max's low growl deepened. They weren't just walking into an old building. They were walking into a nightmare. The door wasn't locked. That should have been Ethan's first warning. The second the rusted hinges creaked open, the stench hit them. Rotting wood, mildew, and something worse, blood. Sophia gagged, covering her nose. God. Ethan's chest tightened as he stepped inside, scanning the dark, cavernous space. The remnants of cages lined the walls, some broken, some still standing, all stained with something Ethan didn't want to think about. Max hesitated. Then his entire body went rigid. A single torn leather collar lay in the dirt. The buckle rusted, the tag ripped off. But Max recognized it. His entire posture changed. His tail lowered, his ears flattened, and then he whimpered. Ethan clenched his fists. This was his cage. Sophia's voice shook. Ethan, he lived here. Max lowered his head, sniffing the collar as if trying to confirm that this wasn't a nightmare. It wasn't. It was real. It had always been real. Ethan heard it before he saw it. A scuffling noise just outside the warehouse. Then, footsteps. Ethan grabbed Sophia's wrist and yanked her behind a stack of crates. Max pressed against the floor, barely breathing. The door creaked open. A man stepped inside. He was big, broad-shouldered, with a scar running down the side of his face, wearing dark clothes and steel-toe boots that clicked against the concrete. His eyes scanned the warehouse, sharp and predatory. Ethan's breath hitched. He wasn't just checking the place out. He was looking for something, or someone. The man took a slow step forward, his gaze flicking to the collar on the ground. A low chuckle rumbled from his chest. "Missed you, boy," he muttered. Max stiffened. Sophia's grip on Ethan's arm tightened. The man knew Max, and judging by the way Max's entire body trembled, he knew this man too, and he was terrified of him. The man moved toward the collar. Ethan's mind raced. If they stayed put, the man might leave. But if Max made a noise, too late. Max whimpered. The man's head snapped up. He froze. Then slowly his mouth curled into a grin. "Well, well," he murmured. "Guess someone found my dog." Ethan's chest burned with rage. Max wasn't his dog. Not anymore. Sophia grabbed Ethan's arm, panic flashing in her eyes. "Ethan, we have to go." Ethan exhaled sharply. "Run." The second the word left his mouth, he grabbed a rusty metal pipe from the ground and threw it across the warehouse. It clattered loudly, echoing off the walls. The man whipped around, distracted. Ethan grabbed Sophia's wrist and sprinted for the door. Max bolted beside them, his nails scraping against the floor as he ran. Behind them, the man cursed loudly. A gun clicked. Sophia gasped, "Ethan, move." They hit the door, bursting out into the alleyway just as bang. The gunshot echoed behind them. The bullet whizzed past Ethan's head, slamming into the metal dumpster with a sickening clang. Ethan's chest heaved. They ran. They didn't stop running. Didn't stop until they were back in the car. Doors slammed, tires screeching against the pavement as Ethan peeled out of the alleyway. Sophia's hands were shaking. Max panted hard in the back seat, his entire body still coiled with tension. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Then Ethan exhaled sharply. "They're watching that place," he muttered. Sophia's breath was uneven. "Ethan, he was going to kill us." Ethan's knuckles tightened against the wheel. "They want Max back." Sophia swallowed hard. "What do we do?" Ethan didn't answer. Because the truth was, he didn't know. All he knew was that the war had begun. And the next time they faced these men, someone wouldn't be walking away. The hum of the car engine was the only sound as Ethan Carter gripped the wheel, his mind spinning with the terrifying reality of what just happened. Sophia Miller sat in the passenger seat, hands trembling, still processing how close they had come to dying in that warehouse. And in the back seat, Max was shaking. Not the kind of shaking from the night they found him. This was worse. His body was rigid, his breathing sharp and uneven, his eyes glazed over, like he wasn't in the car anymore, like he was back in that cage. Sophia turned, her voice wavering. "Max?" No response. Ethan's chest burned. He had seen this look before. Trauma. Max wasn't just afraid, he was reliving it. The fights, the blood, the man in the warehouse. The past was pulling him under and he couldn't escape. Ethan clenched his jaw. That bastard. Max had recognized him. And worse, he had recognized Max. Which meant they had just stepped into something far bigger than they ever imagined. They pulled into their driveway, but the feeling of safety was long gone. Ethan parked, turned off the engine, and exhaled. "We need answers," he muttered. Sophia rubbed her temples. "Answers from who, Ethan? That guy tried to kill us." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Exactly. Which means we're close to something." Sophia swallowed hard. "Something we're not ready for." Ethan turned to her. "Do you want to hand Max back?" She froze. Then without hesitation, "No." Ethan nodded. "Then we have to see this through." Sophia exhaled. "So where do we start?" Ethan's eyes darkened. The video. Back inside, Sophia pulled up the illegal dogfighting video they had found earlier. The warehouse from the footage was the same one they had just escaped from, but now they weren't just looking at the scene. They were looking for details. And they found them. In the background, a group of men stood near the fight pit, their faces blurred, but their clothing identifiable. One of them? The man from the warehouse. Sophia's stomach turned. Ethan pointed at the logo on the man's sleeve, a red wolf's head stitched into his jacket. "Recognize that?" he asked. Sophia frowned. "No. Should I?" Ethan opened another tab and typed Red Wolf dogfighting into the search bar. Within seconds, his screen was flooded with news articles, police reports, and anonymous forum posts. Sophia leaned closer. "What is this?" Ethan's voice was low, filled with disgust. "This is an underground dogfighting syndicate. They operate across multiple states, moving dogs between secret fight rings." Sophia's breath hitched. "And Max?" Ethan clicked on a forum post from an anonymous whistleblower. The post was titled, "The Red Wolf Syndicate, The Dogs Who Never Escape." Ethan's stomach dropped. Beneath the title was a list of names of dogs who had fought and died. Sophia's fingers hovered over the mouse as she scrolled. Then, they saw it. One name, halfway down the list, standing out like a ghost from the past. Ghost. Ethan's breath hitched. "No?" Sophia covered her mouth. Ghost. That was Max's fight name. He wasn't just a survivor, he had been one of their champions. And now, they wanted him back. The air in the room felt suffocating. Sophia closed the laptop, trying to block out the truth. Ethan's hands clenched. "We need more information." Sophia shook her head. "Ethan, we already know enough. These people are killers. We need to disappear." Ethan exhaled. "And let them keep doing this to other dogs?" Sophia hesitated. Then, her phone buzzed. A text message from an unknown number. She picked it up, her heart pounding. The message read, "Stop looking, or you'll end up like me." A chill crawled up her spine. Beneath the text was a single image, a mugshot. Sophia squinted. "Who?" Ethan's blood ran cold. Before he could finish, another message appeared. He looked too deep. He went missing 2 weeks later. Sophia's chest tightened. "Ethan, what the hell is happening?" Ethan swallowed hard. "This isn't just a dogfighting ring." Sophia's hands trembled. "Then what is it?" Ethan met her gaze, his voice grim. "It's a damn mafia operation." Sophia paced the room, panic clawing at her throat. "This is too big, Ethan. We can't do this alone." Ethan exhaled, rubbing his temples. "You're right." Sophia blinked. "Wait, what?" Ethan turned, eyes dead serious. "We're calling someone." Sophia frowned. "Who?" Ethan hesitated. Then he grabbed his phone and dialed. The line rang. Then a gruff voice answered. "Carter, been a long time." Sophia's pulse spiked. "Who is that?" Ethan swallowed hard. "An old friend." The voice on the line exhaled. "You sound desperate. What the hell have you gotten yourself into?" Ethan glanced at Max, the dog curled on the floor, still trembling, and then, "The kind of trouble I can't walk away from." The call ended with a single sentence. "Meet me in 1 hour, and don't bring the dog." Ethan Carter let out a slow breath as he lowered his phone. Sophia Miller watched him, arms crossed, her expression a mix of fear and disbelief. "Who was that?" Ethan hesitated. "Someone who used to be on the wrong side of the law and knows how to dig up things that don't want to be found." Sophia's jaw tightened. "And we trust him?" Ethan shook his head. "No, but right now, we don't have a choice." Sophia's fingers curled around her sleeves. "What if this is a mistake?" Ethan looked over at Max, still curled up on the blanket, his eyes barely open, his body stiff even in sleep. Then he turned back to Sophia. The mistake would be not stopping these people. The diner smelled like burnt coffee and bad decisions. Ethan walked in, scanning the booths until he spotted him. Declan Shaw. Once a criminal investigator, Declan had disappeared from official records years ago after getting too close to organized crime. Now, he was off the grid, living in the shadows, selling information for the right price. The moment Ethan sat down, Declan slid a cup of black coffee toward him. "You look like hell," he muttered. Ethan ignored the comment. "I need information." Declan smirked. "And here I thought this was a friendly reunion." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Cut the crap. What do you know about the Red Wolf Syndicate?" Declan's smirk vanished. He leaned back, exhaling. "You're playing a dangerous game, Carter." Ethan's patience thinned. "I don't care. Tell me what you know." Declan sighed. "The Red Wolf Syndicate is more than just an underground dogfighting ring. It's an operation that stretches across multiple states. High rollers, illegal gambling, corrupt officials. This isn't just thugs running fights in back alleys." Ethan's stomach twisted. "How deep does it go?" Declan's eyes darkened. "Let's just say if you found your way to them, they've already decided what to do with you." Ethan's blood ran cold. Sophia, Max, their house, they weren't just being watched, they were marked. Declan studied Ethan for a long moment before sighing. "All right," he muttered. "Tell me exactly what happened." Ethan hesitated, then told him everything. Finding Max, The black SUV, the break-in, the gunshot at the warehouse. When he mentioned the name Ghost, Declan's hand tightened around his coffee mug. "Damn it, Carter," he muttered. Ethan frowned. "What?" Declan exhaled sharply. Ghost wasn't just any dog in the ring, he was their champion. Ethan's pulse spiked. Declan continued. "The Syndicate runs its fights like a business. Every major operation has one dog that makes them millions, one dog that becomes a symbol. Ghost was that dog." Ethan clenched his fists. "And when he escaped?" Declan smirked grimly. "You think these guys just let a champion run free? You think they don't want their biggest investment back?" Ethan's chest burned. "This isn't just revenge," Declan said. "It's business." Ethan swallowed hard, which meant they weren't just after Max. They were prepared to kill anyone who got in the way. Declan leaned forward. "You have two options, Carter." Ethan exhaled. "Let me guess. 1, I give Max back." Declan nodded. "And you walk away, but Max doesn't." Ethan's jaw tightened. "And the second option?" Declan's smirk was humorless. "You fight, but understand this. If you take them on, you better be ready to finish it." Ethan glanced down at his hands. They were scarred, rough, a reminder of his own past fights. He wasn't a soldier, he wasn't a cop, but he sure as hell wasn't going to roll over and let Max die. He looked up, his voice steady. "Where do I start?" Declan smirked. "That's the spirit." He slid a burner phone across the table. "This number belongs to a guy named Reese Calloway. He used to be an insider for the Syndicate before they turned on him. If you want dirt on them, he's your best shot." Ethan picked up the phone, nodding. "And what did you get out of this?" Declan leaned back, taking a slow sip of his coffee. "Just the satisfaction of knowing you're about to light a match in a gasoline factory." When Ethan returned home, Sophia was sitting on the floor beside Max, stroking his fur. "He's different today," she murmured. Ethan frowned. "How?" Sophia glanced up at him. "He's not just scared anymore," she whispered. "He's angry." Ethan knelt down, watching as Max's eyes followed him. The shepherd's ears twitched, his breathing slow and steady. For the first time since they found him, Max looked ready. Ethan exhaled. "Good," he muttered. Because the fight wasn't just theirs anymore, it was his too. The call ended with a single sentence. "Meet me in 1 hour, and don't bring the dog." Ethan Carter let out a slow breath as he lowered his phone. Sophia Miller watched him, arms crossed, her expression a mix of fear and disbelief. "Who was that?" Ethan hesitated. "Someone who used to be on the wrong side of the law and knows how to dig up things that don't want to be found." Sophia's jaw tightened. "And we trust him?" Ethan shook his head. "No, but right now we don't have a choice." Sophia's fingers curled around her sleeves. "What if this is a mistake?" Ethan looked over at Max, still curled up on the blanket, his eyes barely open, his body stiff even in sleep. Then he turned back to Sophia. "The mistake would be not stopping these people." The diner smelled like burnt coffee and bad decisions. Ethan walked in, scanning the booths until he spotted him. Declan Shaw. Once a criminal investigator, Declan had disappeared from official records years ago after getting too close to organized crime. Now, he was off the grid, living in the shadows, selling information for the right price. The moment Ethan sat down, Declan slid a cup of black coffee toward him. "You look like hell," he muttered. Ethan ignored the comment. "I need information." Declan smirked. "And here I thought this was a friendly reunion." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Cut the crap. What do you know about the Red Wolf Syndicate?" Declan's smirk vanished. He leaned back, exhaling. "You're playing a dangerous game, Carter." Ethan's patience thinned. "I don't care. Tell me what you know." Declan sighed. "The Red Wolf Syndicate is more than just an underground dogfighting ring. It's an operation that stretches across multiple states. High rollers, illegal gambling, corrupt officials. This isn't just thugs running fights in back alleys." Ethan's stomach twisted. "How deep does it go?" Declan's eyes darkened. "Let's just say, if you found your way to them, they've already decided what to do with you." Ethan's blood ran cold. Sophia, Max, their house, they weren't just being watched, they were marked. Declan studied Ethan for a long moment before sighing. "All right," he muttered. "Tell me exactly what happened." Ethan hesitated, then told him everything. Finding Max, the black SUV, the break-in, the gunshot at the warehouse. When he mentioned the name Ghost, Declan's hand tightened around his coffee mug. "Damn it, Carter," he muttered. Ethan frowned. "What?" Declan exhaled sharply. Ghost wasn't just any dog in the ring, he was their champion. Ethan's pulse spiked. Declan continued, "The Syndicate runs its fights like a business. Every major operation has one dog that makes them millions, one dog that becomes a symbol. Ghost was that dog." Ethan clenched his fists, and when he escaped, Declan smirked grimly. "You think these guys just let a champion run free? You think they don't want their biggest investment back?" Ethan's chest burned. "This isn't just revenge," Declan said. "It's business." Ethan swallowed hard, which meant they weren't just after Max. They were prepared to kill anyone who got in the way. Declan leaned forward. "You have two options, Carter." Ethan exhaled. "Let me guess. One, I give Max back." Declan nodded. "And you walk away, but Max doesn't." Ethan's jaw tightened. "And the second option?" Declan's smirk was humorless. "You fight, but understand this. If you take them on, you better be ready to finish it." Ethan glanced down at his hands. They were scarred, rough, a reminder of his own past fights. He wasn't a soldier. He wasn't a cop. But he sure as hell wasn't going to roll over and let Max die. He looked up, his voice steady. "Where do I start?" Declan smirked. "That's the spirit." He slid a burner phone across the table. "This number belongs to a guy named Reese Calloway. He used to be an insider for the Syndicate before they turned on him. If you want dirt on them, he's your best shot." Ethan picked up the phone, nodding. "And what do you get out of this?" Declan leaned back, taking a slow sip of his coffee. "Just the satisfaction of knowing you're about to light a match in a gasoline factory." When Ethan returned home, Sophia was sitting on the floor beside Max, stroking his fur. "He's different today," she murmured. Ethan frowned. "How?" Sophia glanced up at him. "He's not just scared anymore," she whispered. "He's angry." Ethan knelt down, watching as Max's eyes followed him. The shepherd's ears twitched, his breathing slow and steady. For the first time since they found him, Max looked ready. Ethan exhaled. He muttered, because the fight wasn't just theirs anymore. It was his too. The name Reese Calloway felt like a loaded gun in Ethan Carter's hand. Declan had given him a burner phone with only one number saved in it. A name. A single point of contact. A man who had once been inside the Red Wolf Syndicate, and somehow lived to tell about it. Ethan exhaled sharply. There was no guarantee this would work. But the alternative? Waiting for the Syndicate to make their next move. And after the break-in, the death threat, and the gunshot at the warehouse, Ethan wasn't going to wait. He pressed the call button. The phone rang twice before someone picked up. A deep, gravelly voice answered. "Who the hell gave you this number?" Ethan clenched his jaw. "A mutual friend." A pause. Then, "You don't have any friends in my world." Ethan's grip tightened. "Maybe not, but I have something the Red Wolf Syndicate wants." Silence. Then, the sound of a lighter flicking open. A deep inhale. Then a slow, exhaled breath of smoke. "Go on." The location Reese Calloway sent was a run-down bar on the outskirts of the city. Ethan parked outside, scanning the lot. No cars, no security cameras. It felt like a trap. Sophia's voice tightened. "This is a bad idea." Ethan exhaled. "You don't have to go in." Sophia shook her head. "Like hell, I'm staying in the car." Ethan's chest tightened, but he didn't argue. They stepped inside. The bar smelled like cheap whiskey and old regrets. A single man sat in the farthest booth, nursing a drink. Reese Calloway, mid-50s, heavy build, gray in his beard, scar over one eye, a man who had seen things and survived them. His eyes flicked up as they approached. "Carter," he muttered, "and you must be the girlfriend." Sophia's jaw tightened. "Who I am doesn't matter." Reese chuckled, taking a slow sip. "Fair enough." Ethan slid into the seat across from him. "We need information," Reese smirked. "Everyone needs something." Ethan's jaw tensed. "We're not playing games. We have a dog that used to belong to the Red Wolf Syndicate." Reese's smirk vanished. Sophia pressed forward. His fight name was Ghost. Reese's entire body stiffened. He leaned back, exhaling. "Oh, damn." Reese ran a hand through his beard, shaking his head. "Of all the dogs to run," he let out a bitter laugh. "You found that one?" Ethan's pulse spiked. "What do you mean?" Reese's gaze darkened. "You don't get it, do you?" He leaned forward. "Ghost wasn't just a champion. He was a legend." Sophia swallowed hard. "We know he fought. We know they made money off him." Reese exhaled sharply. "Kid, you don't know half of it." He tapped the table. "There are 3 types of dogs in the Syndicate. 1, the bait dogs, the ones tortured, maimed, and thrown in the ring to train the fighters. 2. The cannon fodder, the ones bred for fighting but disposable. 3. The champions, the dogs that never lose, the dogs that make them rich. Reese's eyes narrowed. Ghost wasn't just a champion, he was the Syndicate's undefeated king. Ethan's hands curled into fists. Reese continued. Dogs like Ghost don't run, and if they do, he exhaled, they don't live. Sophia's breath hitched, but he did. Reese's lips pressed into a thin line, which is why they won't stop. Ethan exhaled sharply. Who's behind all of it? Reese hesitated. Then he reached into his jacket, pulled out a folded piece of paper, and slid it across the table. Ethan opened it. His stomach dropped. It was a list of names. Cops, judges, businessmen, people in power, people who were keeping the Syndicate untouchable. Sophia's voice shook. The police were never going to help us. Reese exhaled. No, because some of them are in on it. Ethan's chest burned with rage. They weren't just fighting criminals. They were fighting a system built to protect them. Ethan's phone buzzed. A blocked number. He hesitated, then answered. A familiar voice spoke. You should have given him back. Ethan's blood ran cold. The man from the warehouse, a low chuckle. Too late now. Then, the line went dead. Ethan shot up. We have to go. Now. Sophia's eyes widened. What? Then boom. The distant sound of an explosion. Ethan's stomach twisted. No, not the house. Not. His phone buzzed again. A new message. Still think you can win? Attached, a photo of their house, up in flames. Sophia screamed. Ethan's vision blurred with fury. Reese muttered, You just stepped into a war, kid. Ethan's jaw clenched. No. His voice was deadly calm. We've been in one since the day Max jumped into our car. The car screeched around the corner, tires burning against the asphalt as Ethan Carter gripped the wheel with white-knuckled fury. Next to him, Sophia Miller sat frozen, eyes locked on the image on Ethan's phone. Their home. The place where they had found safety. The place where they had promised Max he'd never have to be afraid again. Engulfed in flames, Max lay in the back seat, his breathing ragged, his body rigid with fear. But there was something new in his eyes now. Something dark. Something that had been buried under years of torment and was just now clawing its way to the surface. Max wasn't just afraid anymore. He was angry. And so was Ethan. They pulled into a desolate parking lot behind an abandoned gas station. Ethan killed the engine, his hands still shaking. Sophia exhaled sharply, rubbing her temples. Ethan, they just burned down our home. Ethan didn't look at her, because if he did, he might lose the last thread of control keeping him from driving straight into hell and taking the Syndicate down himself. We should have known, he muttered. Sophia's voice wavered. We should have known that criminals with deep pockets would commit arson. Ethan clenched his jaw. We should have known they'd escalate. Sophia stared at him. Ethan, our house is gone. Ethan finally turned to her. His eyes were cold. That just means we have nothing left to lose. Sophia's breath hitched because she saw it in his face. Ethan had already decided. They weren't running anymore. They were going to war. Ethan grabbed his phone, dialing Reese Calloway. The line rang once, twice. Then, that was fast. Ethan's blood burned. They torched my damn house. Reese let out a low exhale. I figured they might. Ethan's fists clenched. You knew this would happen? I knew they'd come after you. That's why I told you to stay in the shadows. Sophia leaned in. Well, that advice is about 2 hours too late, Reese sighed. All right, kid, you want my help? Ethan's jaw tightened. You wouldn't have given us your number if you weren't already in this. Reese chuckled. Fair enough. A pause. Then, his voice darkened. Meet me in 20 minutes and bring the dog. The meeting spot was another abandoned warehouse, but this time, Ethan knew Reese had picked it for a reason. Somewhere quiet, somewhere off the grid, somewhere a body could disappear if necessary. They parked. Ethan stepped out first, scanning the area. Reese stood near a stack of old shipping containers, lighting a cigarette. Sophia got out next, then Max. Reese's gaze flicked to the shepherd, his lips pressed into a thin line. Damn, he really is Ghost. Max stared at him, no growling. No flinching, just cold recognition. Ethan crossed his arms. Tell us what we don't know. Reese exhaled smoke, then dropped the cigarette, crushing it under his boot. You already know this operation runs deep. Cops, judges, rich bastards who like to gamble. Ethan nodded stiffly. But what you don't know is this. Reese's gaze darkened. The Red Wolf Syndicate isn't just about fights. Sophia frowned. What do you mean? Reese leaned forward. They're running something bigger than just dogfights. It's a pipeline. Ethan's stomach turned. Pipeline? Reese's jaw tightened. Dogs like Ghost, the champions? When they stop winning, they don't just die in the ring. Sophia paled. Then what happens to them? Reese's expression was grim. They get sold. Silence. Then Sophia's voice broke. Sold to who? Reese's eyes flicked to Max, and Ethan understood. To the highest bidder. Sophia's breath hitched. You're saying they auction off the dogs? Reese nodded. Private buyers, people who want trophies, or pets, if you can even call it that. Dogs who are champions go for the highest prices. Ethan's hands curled into fists. They were planning to sell Max. Reese's gaze didn't waver. Yeah, and they're pissed they lost their payday. Sophia swallowed back the bile in her throat. This wasn't just about revenge. This was business. And Max? He wasn't just a dog, he was millions of dollars in lost profit. Ethan exhaled sharply. Where's their next auction? Reese's brows shot up. You sure you want to go that route? Ethan's eyes were deadly calm. I'm sure. Reese studied him for a long moment. Then he pulled a crumpled piece of paper from his jacket and handed it over. Ethan unfolded it. A time, a date, a location, a private auction. In 72 hours. Sophia's fingers tightened around Ethan's sleeve. We can't do this alone. Ethan exhaled. No, but we're not going in to fight. Sophia frowned. Then what are we doing? Ethan glanced down at Max. The dog who had suffered. The dog who had survived. The dog who deserved justice. Ethan's voice was deadly quiet. We're going to burn their entire operation to the ground. The next 72 hours would be hell. They needed a plan, a team, a way to expose the syndicate without dying first. Because this wasn't just about Max anymore. This was about every single dog still trapped in the syndicate. Reese exhaled. If you do this, there's no walking away. Ethan met his gaze. There was no walking away the moment Max jumped into my car. 3 days. That's all the time Ethan Carter, Sophia Miller, and Reese Calloway had to put together a plan. 72 hours until the Red Wolf Syndicate's private auction, where Max was supposed to be sold. They weren't just going to stop the sale. They were going to end the entire operation. For Max, for every dog that never escaped, for justice. There was no room for mistakes. Because this time, there was no coming back. The first thing they needed? Backup. Reese had contacts, people who had left the game but still owed him favors. Ethan and Sophia didn't trust them. But trust wasn't an option anymore. At an abandoned auto shop on the outskirts of town, 4 men and 1 woman stood in the dim light, waiting. All of them had the same look in their eyes, people who had been burned by the system. People who hated injustice. People who wanted to burn the syndicate down just as much as they did. This is suicide, one of them muttered. Reese smirked. Ain't that the fun part? They mapped it out. Step 1, get inside. Oh, Ethan and Sophia would pose as buyers using a fake identity Reese had secured. Step 2, expose everything. Oh, hidden cameras, live feed, the world would see what the syndicate had been hiding. Step 3, shut it down. Oh, the moment the footage was live, they take the place apart. The only problem, the syndicate knew them now, which meant if anyone recognized them, they were dead. Sophia swallowed hard. This is insane. Ethan looked at Max. The dog stared back, calm, focused, ready. No fear, no hesitation. Max wasn't just a victim anymore. He was a soldier in this war. Ethan exhaled. No, it's justice. The syndicate held their private auctions in hidden locations, ones that changed every time. This one? A massive secluded estate owned by a man who had never seen a consequence in his life. Security was tight, armed guards pat-downs at the entrance. Every buyer vetted. Reese's fake IDs got Ethan and Sophia inside. Max? He had to be caged. It was the only way to make it look real. And if Ethan had to grit his teeth as Max was led into the building behind them, locked behind steel bars like he was nothing but property, he reminded himself, this was temporary. Because by the end of the night, this place would be nothing but ashes. Inside, the estate was opulent. Marble floors, gold fixtures, the kind of wealth built on the suffering of others. And the people? Billionaires, politicians, businessmen, all dressed in expensive suits, sipping champagne, casually discussing the lives they were about to purchase. Sophia gritted her teeth. I want to be sick. Ethan's hands curled into fists. He had seen monsters before, but never like this. These weren't gangsters. These weren't street thugs. These were people who smiled on magazine covers. People who walked free while others bled for their amusement. And the worst part? They thought they were untouchable. Not tonight. They were minutes away from executing their plan when Reese's phone buzzed. He glanced down and froze. Ethan frowned. What? Reese's face turned to stone. We've got a problem. Sophia's stomach dropped. What kind of problem? Reese exhaled sharply. One of my guys just texted. They know you're here. Ethan's blood ran cold. How? Reese's expression darkened. Because someone tipped them off. Sophia's breath hitched. Who? A voice behind them answered. Me. Ethan turned and felt his stomach drop. One of their own. One of Reese's trusted contacts, standing there with a gun aimed at them. The man smirked. Did you really think you could take down the syndicate? Ethan clenched his jaw. Why? The man chuckled. Because some of us know which side wins. A voice crackled over the estate's intercom system. Ladies and gentlemen, it seems we have some uninvited guests. Shall we deal with them? Ethan's hands curled into fists. And then, gunfire. All hell broke loose. Reese lunged first, slamming into the traitor just as the man fired. The bullet missed? Barely. Sophia grabbed Ethan, yanking him behind a marble pillar as guards flooded the room. The auction guests didn't even flinch. Some of them even laughed. Because they thought this was part of the entertainment. Ethan's rage boiled over. No more games. No more pretending. Ethan grabbed Sophia's phone, tapped into the live feed and hit send. Across the world, millions of screens lit up, and the syndicate's empire was exposed. Gunfire. Screaming. And in the middle of the chaos, Max's cage door swung open. For a moment, he just stood there, looking at the men who had broken him, looking at the monsters who had controlled him. And then, he ran straight for them. The syndicate had spent years trying to turn Max into a killer, but they had never expected this. He wasn't fighting for them anymore. He was fighting for himself. And by the time it was over, the syndicate was in ruins. By the time the authorities arrived, too late as always, the estate was in flames. The syndicate was finished. The world had seen their crimes. And Ethan, Sophia, and Max, they had won. But victory came with a cost. They could never go back. They could never live normal lives again. But as Max curled up next to Ethan that night, finally safe, finally free, Ethan knew one thing: it was worth it, because Max was home, and this time, no one was ever taking him away again.
Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please support me by clicking the logo in the bottom right corner to subscribe to my channel. This way you won't miss any of the exciting stories coming up. Thank you so much.